Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sensory Diet. It is my privilege to be introducing Janice Agarwal. She is a pediatric physical therapist with over 30 years of experience treating children birth to 3 years of age. Janice was part of the Boston City Hospital Neurodevelopmental Evaluation Team and the St. Mary's Hospital for Children's Early Intervention Team in New York. She received her certification in pediatric neurodevelopmental training at Bobath Center in London, England. She has lectured nationally and internationally on developmental intervention, sensory integration for hypotonic children and adults with PWS. She also has an extensive background incorporating sensory integration to normalize development and help manage behavioral problems in children and adults with special needs. PWSA USA published her book, Therapeutic Interventions for Children with Prader-Willi Syndrome. Janice is a former 9-year member of the PWSA USA Board of Directors. She is the mother of 2 boys, Alex, 21, with PWS, and Sam, age 20. She lives in Indiana, where she and her husband, David, are developing a farm which will vocationally support adults with special needs. It is up to you now, Janice, to share with us all of your knowledge on sensory integration. We will do a question and answer period, so you can do your Q&A questions in chat, and then we will do that later. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you and welcome for joining me. My name is Janice Agarwal. I am a physical therapist. I am also a mom. And, after 30-something years, I thought I was one of those really empathetic, understanding therapists. But I don't think you ever fully understand what it's like to go through the whole journey of a child with special needs until you actually go through it. So I have had a lot of chances to get to learn more and more about our families. I've been supporting families with special needs, and most definitely Prader-Willi syndrome for over 21 years predominantly. So I've seen kids start from the very beginning and 21 years later, so we can see what I've offered to them and then how they've worked that out. I'm hoping that each and every one of you have had opportunities to download some of the sheets. This is a sheet that I put together many years ago, and it's pretty much gives you all the information of the things that we're going to talk about today. There was a second sheet that you must have downloaded, and it's going to take each and every one of these subjects. And what I'm going to ask that you do is you do one thing for each subject, for proprioception, for vestibular sensory stuff, so that when you end this lecture today, you leave it with one thing to do in each section. Only one thing. Don't be an overachiever here, because everything that you do is going to be a positive result, but I don't want you to bite off more than you can chew, because this is a really tough journey as we work. We're also at the very end going to be talking about how to look at a behavioral of our child, so that we can kind of look back and see what we can do to change that behavior. But let's get going. I want to start with, first off, our kids are actually fun. I truly believe God only gives us what we can handle. And the thing I love about our children and adults with special needs is they tune into who we are, and they actually get to know us, and whatever your favorite thing is becomes their favorite things. They're like our biggest cheerleaders in life. And I think that sometimes when we come out from these conferences and we come out from talking to parents, we start seeing the negative. And truly, in my world, I see mostly positive. I really do, because they are the greatest kids. But they don't want to have behaviors. They want to be just like all the other kids. They want to be able to do all the activities that the other kids are doing. And we have some of those tools that we can give you to help them to be more successful. So one of the things we're going to be talking about is creating a sensory diet for all of our kids with Prader-Willi syndrome. So we all discuss therapy. You've talked to someone about PT and OT and speech therapists, and you've got behavioral therapists. And one of the missing links to all of this is the sensory. And why is that missing? Because all of the movements, all of the behaviors, all of the things we do go up pathways to our brain back and forth. And that pathway leads to that sensory pathway. So if they're not feeling something, if they're not understanding something, if they don't, they can't communicate something, that reflects itself in poor behavior, or it reflects itself in inability to do things. So if the more sensory integration we do, the more capable our adults are good and children are going to be. So what is it? So right now, sensory integration, sensory processing, we're going to go back and forth with those words so that you understand them, because each state now is using different verbiage, which is just annoying. So sensory integration, which is sensory processing, is the process of using our senses to take in and organize the information from our everyday activities. So when they are looking around, they can start to see and they can kind of put it in their brain what's really going on. So when the brain has trouble receiving and responding information that comes from our sensory, that becomes the disorder. All children with Prader-Willi syndrome have sensory processing issues. Every single one of them. If they did not move, if their targeted disorders, their timelines were not the same, they have sensory. If they're not getting their fine motor down, or their gross motor down, or their language skills, it goes back to they are not understanding how to move their tongue, how to move their mouth, how to move their arms. That is all sensory. And as we work more on sensory, we are going to see better motor. So some of the things we see when we see sensory processing are an acute awareness of background noises. Sometimes we think they're not listening to us. It's not because they're not listening to us. It's because they can't listen to us, because there's so much going around that they can't hone in onto just your voice. That's a listening processing issue. And that's something that we can fix in our children. But I see it often. Many parents keep saying they just don't pay attention. They can't pay attention. It's not that they don't, they can't, because of too much information around them. They are fascinated with lights and fans and waters, spinning items, taking things apart, putting them back together. They have coordination problems. They bump into things. They're clumsy kids. They're either really, really tired all the time, or they're sometimes just way overactive. They have an unusually difficult problem with transitions, and we can fix that. We can fix that. They're the sounds, like you'll hear them, they can't hear loud sounds, or they can't tune in to small sounds. And again, that's because of what is the filter stopping them. So I'm just going to tell you a quick story. For some of our kids, when they're in classes, the teachers say they don't hear them, and it's because all the noises and the kids around them. So either you put the child in the front of the classroom where they can hear, or you can get a child on their IEPs, a small little sensory necklace that allows them to have little earbuds that goes into the ears, and the teacher will wear a microphone, and whatever the teacher or the person talking about says goes right into their ears, and it eliminates all of the processing around them. And it's something to think about if you feel like your child is not learning as much as they should. So so what is sensory integration? This is a process of organizational ability, and it is the foundation for our motor skills, our social behaviors, the ability to accomplish more complicated learning tasks, both in school and at home. If you can't feel something, you can't learn it, and therefore they can't move. So we need to really work on the sensory. When Alex, my son, was born, I would watch the news, and every night while I was watching the news, I would just give him deep tissue massages. We always had swings going on. We always had things that would constantly be motivating him to learn. I never kept toys away. I brought toys into him, so he would learn all the textures and all the feelings and smells. Because they can't move outside of their little circle, we have to bring that to them. So the sensory information that we're going to discuss today is your vestibular system, your proprioceptive system, your tactile, and then your oral motor system. All of these are going to be on that sheet. And I want you to pick one thing as we go through this for each section that you're going to write down and say, I'm committing myself to this week, so that you can see a change, and you will see a change. It's funny. I once did this lecture, and I did it to a group home out in New York. And probably several years, 4 or 5 years later, the head of the group home came up to me and said, you know, we started doing deep sensory to a girl in our organization who had the worst behavioral problems, and she pulled her hair and everything was horrible. And she now has the best behavior, and she's the most active. That was a commitment that they gave to this adult, which was fantastic. But that's how powerful sensory can be. So what does it do? It provides information about movement, gravity, and the changing of your head position. So the vestibular is kind of a cool thing. It's an inner ear thing. And what it does is it's got, it's multi-plane, and it has like a small drop that forms right on the cilia, the little hair. And what its goal is to help to stabilize our eyes. When we're moving and when we're looking around, we want our eyes to be very level. It allows our head to be upright. So your body is always trying to protect its head. That's one of the systems that allow us to keep our head nice and upright. It's one of our biggest issues for balance. So I think our vestibular is one of the things that helps us get our protective reactions. Your protective reactions are when you bring your hands forward or to the side or behind them so that when you fall, you don't hit your head. Those protective reactions start around 4 or 5 months, so that when a child starts to get themselves more upright and they fall forward, they've got their arms to protect them. That is something that you need to work with your therapist to make certain is always working. Why is that important? Because can you imagine as they become more upright and walking and running, how scary that would be if they fell and they couldn't bring their arms out fast enough so they could protect their head? That would be a really scary thing. And that's often the reason why we don't see our kids get to higher level functions. The vestibular also needs to accurately process information, which is so that we can properly see, because our eyes are aligned on our head through our vestibular system, we see properly. It maintains a more upright posture. As we work on our vestibular system, we often find that those children that are all slumped over start to become more upright. I think it's one of the coolest things is when you put a child on a swing, you will start to see them more upright. We use that a lot when we're working on back and trunk control because it's a natural thing. It's using our reactions as a positive reinforcement. It helps us maintain balance. You know, we really started to figure this out when we saw some geriatric people and they were in beds for extended period of times. And then they would get out of bed and they were so afraid to move. And we found how easy it was to using the vestibular system to get that balance back. And that is something we will really be working with our kids. We want to make sure they have excellent balance so they can do more advanced activities. The righting reactions. So the righting reactions are when you move side to side or front to back, you notice that your head just always kind of stays upright. We get forward protective reactions to the side and the back as we progress, but there are so many other righting reactions. And you've probably seen your doctor when you brought your young baby into the pediatrician and they were doing all these things to see if they could right themselves. They're natural reactions that many of our children don't have at young ages. But because they are reactions, they are something that your therapist can work towards advancing. So it's not as if they don't have them yet. So they help us plan to actions. When I know what my body is going to do, it allows me to do more things, therefore allowing me to do movement. The other really nice thing about the vestibular is that calming reaction as we rock or as we get that soothing up and down kind of motions. We want to be able to use that, especially as our children are getting older, and we're going to be putting them into situations where they will have more adverse reactions. So we can allow them to be calm before they go into situations. And I think, again, what we're trying to do, and the goal of this is to allow our children and our adults to be successful. And we can do that. So vestibular, what we see the inability to use eyes and hands together, poor balance, difficulty paying attention and the reasoning, avoid movement or touch, difficulty maintaining alertness, difficulty organizing self and using self-control, poor understanding of spatial relationships, and we see a poor understanding of what is said to them, that auditory processing, which goes through our ears, and they hear everything too much. I think as one of the things we are finding is that we work more on vestibular. We are seeing some of that auditory processing go away or recede quite a bit more. So vestibular, I have to say that I love these teacups. And one of the greatest things in the state of Indiana is the state fair. And we haven't had it last year, but before kids start to school, I love them being on these rides. And one of the things you notice, the more vestibular, the more stuff you give our kids, they crave it even more because their bodies need it. And you see better behavior with that. So what can we do? Now, again, I want you to write one of these things down: rocking, gentle bouncing, rocking in a rocking chair and a rocking horse, walking, running, hiking, bounce on large balls. We used to put a blow up mattress in my living room so that the kids could just throw themselves on it. Rolling, roughhousing. Moms, this is up to you. You need to let the fathers go in and do some of the roughhousing. I think it's a really important thing. And we think our kids are really fragile, but they're not as fragile as you think they are. Somersaulting, spinning on wheels. And again, we have to remember that that calming and rocking is a really good thing. We can use that to our benefit. So now we're going to go to the next thing, which is called proprioception. Proprioception is a system that feeds back information about our position, movement, and balance from other systems. All of that proprioception, the receptors, are in our joints. So when we are putting pressure on our joints, when we're jumping, when we're doing sit-ups, when we're trying to pull ourselves up, that is alerting the joint, which tells our brain that we're doing something. So we want to start increasing all that awareness on our joints. So what are some of the inputs that we have? It provides that unconscious awareness of body position. I can put my arm way up here and I know it's there. I don't have to think about it because the joints are telling my brain. Now, a lot of our children have difficulty with that, especially our young children. So what we need to do is work on compression, work on joint mobilization. These are things that you can talk to your therapist about, and you can be doing on a regular daily basis as you're giving them deep massages or you're working with them. You can push on those joints and give them a really good awareness. The other joint, the most powerful joint we have, is our jaw muscles. And we're going to talk about that at the very end. We can use that to our benefit. It tells us about the position of our body parts, the relationship to each other, and the relationship to other people and objects. That's a really big thing so that we know where people are and how close they are. We learn those relationships on the ground when we're on our bellies, and we learn where toys are, and we learn where to pick them up. Where many of our children had difficulty doing that, so they don't understand that spatial relationship and how far they need to move to get to something. That is part of our proprioception. That is something that we need to teach them. It also communicates how much force is needed for muscle contraction. It allows that grading of movement. And we think about just a small chick in our hand and how we would have to hold it very gently. But if we don't have that graded movement, we would actually smush it. You know, I often hear parents say, gentle, 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 because they don't understand how much force, but we can teach them that. And what do we see with this? Again, we see clumsiness. They exert too much pressure when they're on a pencil. You can see the whites of their fingers. These are the kids that throw tantrums on the ground. They're also very affectionate. They like hugs. They're seeking all of that information. They don't like tight spaces, or they don't like big open air spaces, depending where they are on that spectrum. And they also have difficulty with fine motor. You know, the funny thing is you need real shoulder strength and you need good proprioceptive understanding to start before you start working on your fine motor. So if your child is not crawling, and if they're not able to do wheelbarrows and have really strong hands, they are naturally going to have poor fine motor skills, and they're going to have a lot of sensory issues. That's something to be thinking about. This is a reason why I tell parents, keep those kids down on the ground as long as you can. So for the treatment of this, I love weighted items, clothes, blankets. I love when our kids can carry heavier items, you know, books, or we used to always have boxes and laundry baskets full of things that they could move around. In school, first thing in the morning, they take a bunch of books down to the office and they bring them back. That is something that just calms them and gets them ready for the day. I love pushing and pulling items, crawling through tunnels, hanging from monkey bars. I love climbing on monkey bars, jumping on a trampoline. Whenever my kids were bad or if they were having a bad day, I would say 50 jumps, and they would go out to the trampoline and they would jump, and they'd start jumping, and within about 10 jumps, they'd start laughing. It's because all that proprioception gives them a body awareness. But the other thing it does is it helps with their serotonin levels. And that's one of the really cool things about this, is that as we work on the joints, and we work on that compression, and we work on that heaviness, that is the one thing that will release what we call serotonin. So an example of this is they're getting all wigged out by something, and the adrenaline is just out of control. And we find we can either give them deep pressure, we can give them hugs, we can get them jumping on something, we can get something moving on those joints, releasing that serotonin, and they start to relax. And I love to give the example of, you've just had the worst day you've ever had. I have a couple of those. You can barely handle life, and you walk in and someone says, you need a hug. And have you ever had that where someone just gave you a really big hug, and you took a deep breath and all the stress left? Sometimes we say, I just need a good cry. Well, that's what our adults and kids need. Sometimes they need that release, and we can give them that. They need it all the time. They need it especially before we go into a situation where we know that they're going to have issues. So we're going to be talking about this. We're going to be talking about the tools that you can give them. When they're young kids, I love the pounding nails. Again, these are things that I am using so that my son can be successful learning his body, but also it becomes a very, very calming thing. Swimming, extra bath time, these are all things that we can do with our children, and it doesn't involve a lot of extra things. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the tactile system. The tactile system is a really tough system because it gives concrete feelings of our body and the environment, but it's our primary protective system. So we have to be really careful with this system. It tends to detect the dysfunction easily because it's exposed to the most abuse. So it provides us with the information about light touch, pressure, vibration, temperature, and pain. And we know that all of our kids have issues with these issues. So this is a really powerful system, and it's something that we can use to our advantage. The feedback from this system will contribute to the development of their body awareness and their motor planning abilities. So it has one more thing that I love. It's the protective system of our whole body. So, it has to go through your skin to get to the rest of your system. So that's something we need to think about, why we need to protect it. And that's the thing we need to also remember, is that for many of our adults, that the tactile system doesn't like the light touch. When I go in and touch anyone, I like to go in and give a firm, like I'm going to touch their bones, not their skin. If you think of getting the heebie-jeebies when you touch the skin lightly or the hair, well, that pretty much is the response our kids have all the time when it comes to their skin. I think that for many of our kids, they feel so threatened that if you put them in the middle of a line in school, they're constantly wondering and they're hyper aware of who's going to touch them, because for you to touch their skin is worse than practically slashing them up, because their skin is on such a high alert. It's almost like electrified. So we never want to just touch our kids. We always want to go in really heavy. We really want to have deep, deep pressure with them. So some of the things that we're going to see with tactile is they're not as sensitive to cuts, pain, or temperature. But if you touch them just once, they melt down. They can have a big old honking cut on their hand, but it's the kid who touched them in the back of the line that sends them to have a meltdown. They don't like having their hair or teeth brushed. That cannot continue. And that's we can fix. They flick their hands or shake their hands. They chew their lips or their teeth or their nails. That's something we can fix. They pick at their skin. I constantly have parents talking to me about picking skin. Again, that's something we can tolerate, we can handle. And they need extra personal space. They're sloppy eaters. They don't like tags in their clothes. I mean, all of you know these things, the insect bites. They're uncomfortable with some of the funnest things that you possibly can do. These are all things that we can fix. And let's talk about the treatment. This picture, my husband does give me permission to do this. Every morning, especially when we're traveling, and we get the opportunity to travel quite a bit, the first thing we do is we get our kids ready for the day. Now, see, we are wise parents. And see, I know that with proprioception, that we just have to put pressure on his joints, his elbow, his shoulders, his hands. So we take advantage of that. And he gives us really nice massages. But in the meantime, we also give him massages. And these are things that we do so that we know he's successful. If I know he's going to have a really hard day at school, I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to bring a big vibrator and vibrate his whole body to get him prepared for that. I'm going to give him joint compression because I know that is something he can use. One of the things we used to do is in the very morning, we'd say, we're just going to squeeze all the bad juices out of you. We'd start from the very bottom. And we would give tight squeezes all the way up until we get to their mouth. And we'd squeeze all the bad juices out before they went to school. And what have I done? I've just given him a fun, deep massage that he's got all that serotonin released and off he goes to start a day. So the start of his day was good. So some of the treatments we could do, I love dress up boxes. And if your child has a problem with dress up boxes, then you go in and you start really giving them deep head massages, deep shoulder massages, hand massages before they do that, desensitize them, and then try to put those hats on and those gloves on. And you keep doing that day after day after day, and you're going to have a child who no longer has a problem putting on hats or gloves. You can do things like painting where they want to be creative and it's a little more fun for them to do. I love grooming. Our kids love animals. So if they can brush the dogs, you got to teach them gentle, but not too gentle, petting them or working out. That's a fun thing to do that you can do. And it's also helping them. You can take and fill gloves and you can fill it with rice or flour and they can really squeeze those things for sensory toys. Sensory toys to fidget. I personally love going to a pet store and find lots of sensory toys and pop beads and things. They're cheap and they seem to last a little bit longer. I don't mean to insult anybody by that. That's just, I'm always trying to find cheap toys. So tactile, we fix it by going in deep. If they have a light sensory issue, I go deep. If they can't put their hat on, I go into the head deep. If they can't put their gloves on, I go deep. If they're going to go into a bad situation, I go deep. You know, I always, if I want to get them prepped for the day, I go in deep. And I know that I'm prepping them for that day, for that next morning. Again, with my babies and you mamas with your babies, I just love my babies every day. I had the best time loving on my son, just giving him deep massages to his arms and legs. And I know I've put it together a video for you young moms, and I encourage you to go look at that. And I encourage you to find a good massage therapist that can teach you these things. And we can talk more about the young babies. But you cannot give your baby enough sensory input. You just cannot. So we're going to talk about the oral motor. And I think this is the one that many people are afraid of because they've got Prader-Willi syndrome. You're like, okay, so now that's the big elephant in the room. Let's deal with it. Let's use that to our advantage because this has proprioception. This has tactile. This area of your face is so sensory intensive that you can use it to your advantage. And the example is, so for many people, they chew gum or they chew on their nails in order to listen to someone speak. Normally in a lecture like this, I would start pointing out people that are trying to like fidget with things so that they can hear me. And I'm a pretty easy person to listen to. So, I mean, I can't even imagine those boring speakers. But let's use this oral motor. So eating is the most sensory intensive activity. And like I said, fun, let's make our kids fun. Let's take that activity that we have and find fun flavors, intense flavors, so that they want to have fun eating. example of this one, we make hot sauces from the peppers we grow, and my son will eat a half of a jar of hot sauce, and he'll send the other half to one of his uncles who likes hot sauces so they can compare. We make that kind of a fun thing. At the end of a meal, they love to eat the lemon slices and the lime slices. So if he's really good at a meal, I give him the lemon slices. He doesn't even have that, like, it's really sour thing on his face, because our kids are so, the hypotonicity and the desensitized areas also happens in their oral motor. And many of our kids don't feel or taste the hypersensory stuff. They don't taste the heat. They don't taste the sour. So I want to encourage that because it's fun and it allows them to kind of wake up. We're going to use that to our advantage. So oral motor, we know that sucking promotes your trunk flexion. If you think about it, you go, you flex, blowing out, promoting trunk extension. So we think of straws and blowing bubbles. Biting promotes jaw, neck, shoulder, and pelvic stability. In order to be able to eat well, you need to have good shoulder, neck, and jaw strength. So when we're feeding them, not the young babies, but our toddlers and stuff, we want to think about how can we strengthen that jaw? Crunching and chewing promotes balance, stability, and mobility in the jaw, neck, shoulder, and pelvis. I can't tell you, for years, PTs and speech therapists, our feeding specialists, we used to always work together because we want to work on trunk and shoulder. And I can work on shoulder and neck stability by working with a feeding therapist because of all the action that's going on in that neck. Some of the treatments, blowing bubbles or whistles. You know, you can go into any of these fun things and find the coolest whistles and just get over the fact that they're going to blow it. Because if they do it once, they're going to do it 1,000 times. But not only is it building those muscles, but think of what it's doing for their pulmonary system. As they have to take a deep breath in to blow it out. And many of our kids already have issues with their respiratory pulmonary systems. We're not going to go into that one this time, but that is a way that we can help with that. Cold or frozen grapes, popsicles, and bananas. We used to take bananas and slice them. And if Alex was really good, he'd get 1 or 2 slices of a frozen banana. That was like awesome. What is he doing? He's working on temperature. He's working on the sensory of cold, but the hardness of the banana, and it's a great reward. I reward for positive. I try not to be more on the negative side of things because our kids need that positive reinforcement. Chewy bagels, dried fruit roll-ups, gum, beef jerky. If you're going to give a kid a piece of bread, make sure it's got texture to it so they actually have to chew and make them chew. I love crunchy pretzels. So I'm told that my personality is more Tigger as opposed to Eeyore. So if and when I get up in the morning, I don't necessarily need crunchy, but many of our kids, when they get up, they're a little bit on the softer side and they're a little slower. So we want to give them crunchy. I want to give them something where I can put yogurt on the top and let them crunch away at it all the time, as opposed to something soft, which is going to feed into their little bit of mushy personality sometimes. I will tell you that these are just ideas of food. I am not recommending these foods. I know all of our kids have different diets when it comes to the food. These are just some ideas for you to use, okay? So I love sour tart. When my kids were young, we had Warheads and they were in a spray and I'd stick them on all the door jambs and I would find reasons to say, what a great job. Look at you. You put on your trousers today. Look, you put on your shoes. How many sprays does that get? And these things are so sour when you spray them in your mouth. I mean, you pucker up. And my Alex, who has Prader-Willi syndrome, he just loved the taste. He did not have that facial change. My son Sam, you could see it. But they love to do good things just to get those rewards. Find ways to reward them. Find things that they can do. Oh, you put your hat on today. Look at you put your gloves on today. You cleaned up after yourself. You put your plate in the dishwasher. Find the positive and find a reward. If you're going to reward them, make it something sensory. Make it something powerful. Sucking, I love that sucking because it really does promote more jaw strength. So that is something to think about, to find things that your child can use. One of the things we've talked about with, I do use gum. And one of the things I do is when I teach a child to chew gum, especially during a really tough time, if we know it's going to be a lot of stress, or if he's going to be in a concert and just kind of massaging his hand isn't going to work, I'll give him a piece of gum. I give a piece of gum and I expect them to give it to me back when they're done. If they don't give it back to me, then I say, okay, well, we can't do that for a while, and I'll try again in a couple of days. But I always expect them to give that gum, that piece of gum, back to me when they're done chewing it. Okay. So that we know. So that's just one way to introduce something to them. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the last thing is we've talked about the whole idea of a sensory diet and how can this work for us. So one of the things I've started to come up with is the autopsy after poor behavior. Sounds crazy, but when we're looking at this, and we can look here. So here is our child, and all of a sudden we see the tantrum happening, or we see the escalation. Well, in the beginning, this part of it, we can change the subject. Sometimes we can change the direction, but there becomes that precipice where there is nothing you can do. And we need to talk about that because during the time that the behavior is happening, the poor behavior, it is best just to walk away. It is best not to get, not to try to intervene, because oftentimes that makes it worse. In the beginning, you can intervene. I used to have a nanny who was the best. She would switch a subject just like that. She could get him to turn on a dime, but we always knew there came this one point where we couldn't stop it. So we need to look at this as what happened before the poor behavior. So we've had the tantrum and now we're talking. What happened before? Was the environment changed? Did we just move and we weren't in our same routine? Let's look at what was going on before that. Can we eliminate that, or can we change that? What was the poor behavior that happened? That's a tough one because for all of our kids, escalation looks different. And then what happened after? So we can see that for many of our kids, and I believe this is true for all of our children, is after the poor behavior, they're exhausted. They did not want that to happen. I know they don't want to have that bad behavior, which is why we're talking about this diet, which is why we're talking about things that we can try to change in their lives, or we can correct before it ever happens, because I don't believe any of our children want that to happen. So was there a change in the sleeping pattern? Were they ill? When my kid is sick, we see a change in emotional behavior. Was there a medicine change? Social media. We're having a real hard time with social media right now. These kids are on and we don't always know what's going on. And kids can be very, very mean, or they can be preyed upon. There's a lot going on. What's going on at school or work. So we want to figure out what was the trigger. If that we can figure that out, we can preemptively strike on that motion. So again, was something taken? Was there a schedule change? It's funny. Can't tell you how many times we see my son having some behavioral issues. We sit back and we think about it and you're like, wow, we just did this and we forgot to get him his massages, or we changed his diet and he wasn't getting the things he needs. And as soon as we back up and realize what situation had changed and we just didn't keep up with it, we can go back and we can change that situation. Things that can escalate poor behavior, that arrhythmic movements, light or unpredictable touch. These are things that you can be looking at. Disorganized visual input. I cannot begin to tell you how important environment is with our adults and kids. It is huge. It is huge. Environment with a lot of noise or different noises. I run an organization now and we pretty much have silence. So some kids may need earphones, but the music or the different things going on in the background can change a kid's behavior completely. So we need to be very, very, very aware of that. There may be too much talking. You're talking too much. They may just need you to back off and be quiet. But again, that change in schedule. Have you guys moved? Have new people coming into their lives? Is it summer? Is it COVID? Is it anything? There are so many things that are changing and we need to look at that. And then what was the poor behavior? Was it just a sensory overload? You know, was there a fight, a fright, or a freeze? That's a really important thing to know, because as we're looking at them, we want to figure out, we want to change how they react, and we can do that. So what were the levels of behavior? Was it they hurt themselves, aggression towards other? That's a really important thing. And I hear a lot of parents talk to me about that. They damage process, or they're irritating. Again, we look at that poor behavior. We need to look at what preempted it. We look at what they did. And then we have to think, what should we do? During the process, we need to stay calm. You need to keep you and the person safe. Give appropriate space. Stop talking. Don't try to bring them down off the cliff there. You know, I can't tell you how many parents, I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. This isn't not the right time. Once they hit that halfway mark, there's not much you can do. Back your language down, visually be there for them, and adjust the agenda, because it's not going to stop them. You know, okay, you're not going to get to that meeting today because that tantrum is going to happen. Sometimes our intervention makes it worse. I seem to think most of the time our intervention makes it worse, which is why we do the autopsies, because we want to try to prevent that from ever getting to that point again. Things that we can do to de-escalate. Really important. Rhythmic movements. Again, I would tell them to go out to the trampoline. I would say get into a swing. I would try to put a weighted blanket on them. I would try to go in and give them those deep hugs at the very beginning. Try to squeeze all that juice out of them. Deep touch and pressure. That's increasing that serotonin. If I know that we're going to get to this situation and I can get there sooner, I can get in there with that deep, deep pressure, and I can release that serotonin, which is the only thing that can stop the adrenaline. That is the only thing that can stop a tantrum from happening. One of the things we used to do at a foundation I worked at, we had bean bags, and we'd have them sit down on the bean bag. We'd put another bean bag on top of them, and we'd lay on them. They would have that burst going on, but in the meantime, you would see, just like I said about the hug, you would all see their face get really red, and then they take a deep breath. You have to make sure you're safe when you're doing this. You have to make sure everyone else is safe when you're doing this. But that is something you can do, and it works. I mean, I've had parents that tell me they roll their kids up like a hot dog, and the kids all crunched up, and they see them, and it actually stops the whole thing from happening. These are a lot of younger kids, and that's a really important thing for our family with younger kids, is the more we do this, the better they will come to depend that you, their parent or caregiver, can help them so they don't have to actually go through the full tantrum. Decrease auditory, stop the noise. You know, if they're outside, have them do something heavy, work. Remember, say, okay, I know you're upset, but can you go push this? Can you go push the wheelbarrow? Can you go do this? Try to get that proprioceptive, try to get that serotonin out, try to figure out, or offer them a piece of gum, offer them a part of a bagel, and that jaw is amazing. It's the same proprioception. It's the same serotonin. It may allow them to de-escalate the situation. So what can you do to head it off or expect poor behavior? That is something when we look back, we can figure out. We have to decide with this, who's going to teach new behavior, especially with our younger kids, because we can start to see what's going on. And if we start really looking at why it's happening, we can try to de-escalate that situation, but who's going to teach it? I highly encourage it not be the parents. Get a behavioral therapist in there, get someone else that knows what they're doing, because the kids don't want to hear you. They don't want to learn from you, but that person can also guide you to learn how to do this so that you can be part of the solution to help them out. How will it be taught? Again, I love behavioral therapists. There are some really great ones out there. And we start looking at how these are happening, and we start using the tools that we have. You will find, true stories, that these kids they will come to you and say, I need this. I need a piece of gum. I need you to massage my hand. Could you give me a massage? They want to stop the bad behavior. They don't want to have bad behavior. The same thing when we're looking at the proprioception vestibular. They want to be the rock stars in Special Olympics. They want to do all these things. We can give them tools to do all this. These are what we're trying to teach you. I love to reinforce good behavior with strengths and interests. because they don't see that their bad behavior is perceived negatively by their social support systems. I can't tell you how many parents I say they don't really care. Well, they don't. Okay, but they see the positive and they do care about the positive. So, conclusion. Our adults with Prader-Willi syndrome are born with abnormal tone, and they all have sensory integration deficiency, every last one of them. They include the oral motor, the visual, the tactile, the vestibular, and proprioception. I want you to remember that when we started this lecture, we talked how to make them stronger, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, how to be able to talk better, how to be able to put on their clothes better. We talked about all the motor activities they could do. And at the end, we talked about the behavioral. You will note that sensory has a part in both of them. And that is something that you can change, you can adjust, and we can correct, and we can make it so our children are better and able to deal with all these things. With intervention, they have a fulfilled and active life. I am not going to say that they're never going to have bad behaviors. My son is 21. He's the greatest kid ever. I'm telling you, Mr. Congeniality, love the kid to death. He still has bad behaviors. But I will tell you, he works. He's amazing on a loom, textile weaving. But the kid has a job. He loves what he does, and he can handle almost anything at this point. You can see him take a deep breath. You can see that he gets a little upset, but he doesn't have to have those big meltdowns so that people look at him, because he doesn't want to have them. We've been working to give him those tools. Behavioral issues and sensory issues are intimately connected. They are one and the same. If you see a behavioral problem, you know you have a sensory issue. Sensory diets are carried over from therapists to parents to caregivers, and they should be based on observations and treatments, but they should always be collaborated. If you've got someone working on motor, they should be working on sensory. So we want to identify the correct diet. The diet changes. It's always going to be kind of one of those things that's very fluid, and it's going to change. They're a lifelong commitment. My son is 21. We have, he constantly goes for deep massages every week on a Sunday. We know he needs that deep input. We're constantly looking at, we have fun with the foods. We have limes and lemons and hot sauces. We make our own hot sauces. We try to have that explosions in his mouth so he can do things. We're very conscious of his diet. We're always looking at making so that oral motor thing is working. It's not an easy thing. It is a lifelong commitment, but we know that our kids are fun. And we know that we want them to be great citizens in this country. And we want everyone to look at them like they're normal people. Because you know what? Who has a child thinking that's not what we want? So, can I have any questions?
Thank you, Janice, for this. A few questions came up in regards to where are the sheets. The sheets are at the bottom of the session content of the hub. So if you want to look there, you can find the sheets that Janice was referencing. Janice, our first question is on proprioception. Can't say it, sorry. Proprioception. I constantly see folks with PWS and exercise programs that are basically cardio. Besides the obvious benefits of some weight training, would weight training also hit that sensory field?
Absolutely. Think about it. That's all your joints, and I think you have to be careful about posture. But I don't think that would be a problem at all. Again, I think all of us can use that. So that the other thing with that one is, I know cardio is important, but bone density. So as we're doing those kind of things, we're also looking at some bone density issues. So I love a little bit of weight.
All right, our next question is, what would you recommend for a toddler who does not like the texture of meat?
Okay, so that's a tough one because I don't know the toddler. So again, your oral motor is the most powerful tool we have. So I would introduce them softer meats, and I'd put it in different things. So I would work more on intensity of flavor as opposed to texture. So I would look at, let's talk about sauces and peppers and different things like that, where the meat becomes a complement, not the primary. Right. So, but if that parent has more issues, I've got some ideas for that, but I'd need to know a little bit more information, and they can always just email me.
All right, thank you. How would you treat skin picking?
So we deal a lot with that. And so the one thing I said was we talked about tactile. Your skin is very sensitive. So all you are very good students now know that in order to deal with skin picking, which is just the skin, you need to go to the bone. And so what we have always found is first thing we do is we go and we do deep massages to that area. Then when I put something on the skin, it has a little like a tingly, like a neosporin kind of a thing. And then not a plastic Band-Aid, but a material Band-Aid that has good adhesive. The ones that are plastic is one more sensory thing that's difficult for many of our kids. So you want to get those cloth Band-Aids and put it on, and then just buy a lot of stock in Band-Aids because you're going to be using them a lot. But I go to the deep part first, and then I deal with the skin.
All right, thank you. Have you seen vestibular system strategies help at all with kyphosis?
Yes. Okay, so kyphosis is where your head is down. So vestibular is probably, again, I keep saying these are really powerful tools. Vestibular starts in utero. That's how strong this, when that kid's doing triple Salchows in your stomach, that's vestibular, and our kids weren't. So swinging is a very linear thing. And as we're doing more linear activities, you will start to see them become more upright. Okay. But the other thing is a lot of kyphosis is that head writing that we were talking about. So we want to do more linear activities so that we can get their heads up and more upright. So again, I know there are several activities on that sheet that I gave you. I would start looking at linear rocking, linear bouncing, linear things that are, they're going to keep them kind of keeping their head up more.
All right, thank you. What is the frequency of sensory motor stimulation that works?
You cannot do enough. So I also have a family, but again, every night I made a point to give my son massages when he was very young. I put things in my house, air mattresses. I was like the sensory queen, but I had a play set that had a rock climbing wall and then swings all the time. I was constantly swinging them. A box of sand so they could play in the sand. We would hide things in the soil to hide the soil. I never let my kids watch television because I was one of those parents. And what I did is I constantly had things for them to do so that they could not get enough of it. You cannot have enough, because when a child is growing up, I mean, have you ever seen the toddler who sits and spins and spins and spins till they fall down? All kids crave sensory, crave vestibular, crave that activity. They're constantly searching out to bring things to their mouth. They're constantly searching to look at things. You cannot give them enough. So that answer is kind of to infinity and beyond.
And I believe we only have accolades for you. We met Janice at the 2019 PWSA convention, and we have taken the advice she has given here today and got their daughter a mini trampoline, a toddler swing hanging from a tree that can go in multi-directional and spin, etc. And it has helped tremendously. Thank you.
And I love it when people listen. Thank you. You know what? They have swings that you can put in, like on door jams. I mean, swings are the greatest things in the world. When my kids were young, we were in a little apartment while my husband was doing his residency, and I put them on door jams and swing them together. And, like that would give me a chance to even watch TV sometimes. I'd be like swinging them or doing something just because I needed a break, but I knew that they were doing something. I tried to keep them active while I was taking breaks. And so you got to be creative in your strategies. This whole like raising kids things is not easy.
We have another question here that says, my 3-year-old is still eating mostly purees. Feeding therapist said oral hypersensitivity is one of the factors. He doesn't feel food in his mouth, so he doesn't realize he needs to chew. Any advice?
I know a really good feeding therapist. Yeah, so this is just what I was talking about. And so for this person, I would start working on all the different flavors. because when you put lemon in your mouth, real lemon, you're going to feel that explosion in your mouth. When you put little things that pop, you're going to feel that explosion. This is a taste where you can do texture, but I would do taste. I would start working on, like, you smell this, now you taste it. You smell this and you taste this, and use some of the real flavors so that they get that awareness in their mouth. And I think that's probably one of the biggest problems. Baby food is rather bland. We don't live in a bland world. You know, I know this for a fact. When you're in India, they're still giving those kids hot food. I mean, you know, you can give a little spice to young children, toddlers. Give them spice. Let them feel that in their mouth so they know they have a mouth.
All right, thank you. What age should we be watching for these sensory issues and start fixing them? And how long does it take to fix them?
Okay, that's probably the best question all day. Again, vestibular starts in utero. How many of us had decreased movement in utero? Do you know your vestibular system is almost completely inactive by the time they're born? So we're already behind when our children are born. So when do we start? Now? That's the answer. Start now. You can't do it enough. I don't think we ever fix it because hypotonia doesn't go away. So what I try to do is think about the strategies, lifelong strategies that we have. An example of that is, again, if we're going into a situation where I know Alex is going to have some issues, I will give him the tools that he needs. It could be just some gum. It could be, we make sure he gets massages before, we have him do some activities, some little warm-ups, whatever the strategies that we've come up with before he goes into a situation so that he is the most successful is the tools that we give him. So I think at this point, he also understands that he has the ability to have some of those tools himself. So in the mornings when he's a little dullish, he'll want something crunchy. But like there are mornings he's like, Mom, I just want some oatmeal. Or like, so he's learning at his age what he needs and what he doesn't need. So we're giving him the tools to train himself, but it's never going to go away because the syndrome doesn't go away.
All right, thank you. We are out of time.